Another new PS5 just leaked. And it's a good thing too, because the PS5 has just been hacked. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady, the channel all about the PS5. Today we are talking about some really cool news, but before we do, make sure you go check down in the description for any accessories you might need, like a DualSense, a new camera, a new headset, maybe even a PS5 itself, but you might want to hold off there after watching this video. First up, let's talk about the Modern Warfare 2 beta. I am really excited for this game. It's one of my most anticipated games for the end of the year. Outside of something like God of War Ragnarok or the Callisto Protocol, it's gonna fill a nice little multiplayer competitive shooter spot in my gaming slate. Getting it downloaded was kind of tricky at first because if you search Modern Warfare 2 beta on the PlayStation 5 app on your phone, it automatically pulls up the PS4 version and you have to manually switch it to the PS5 version and then buy it even though it's free. And then once you do that, you can download it straight to your PS5. And graphically, it looked pretty good. Honestly, some of the colors looked a little washed out and the water in one of the maps looked like, I don't know, like PS3 era textures, but the actual weapon textures looked incredible to me. And just the overall look and feel of all the weapons is why I like Modern Warfare now more than some of the other spin-offs in the Call of Duty franchise. Everything feels weighty and heavy, and part of that is because of the DualSense features. It uses the haptic feedbacks when you're running around. You can feel footsteps behind you, you can feel your own footsteps, you can feel the shock waves and reverberations of gunshots that are farther away. They'll be a little bit softer. That's pretty cool. But the actual adaptive trigger support I thought was great because you can just squeeze the trigger and you'll get, it seems a little bit less recoil out of the weapon rather than if you pull the trigger all the way. My favorite thing about this beta though is definitely the progression tree of the weapons. You start out with the M4 and the way you level it up is you change the actual receiver frame of the weapon and there's a whole progression tree, right? So once you level up one frame all the way, you can switch to a different one. And that next frame turned it from an assault rifle into an LMG. And then the next upgrade basically turned it into a semi-auto rifle. And I had the best luck with that. And then the final upgrade you're able to get is the Hurricane, which I guess is an SMG frame for it. And that thing just absolutely cleans up. And then finally, something I thought was kind of cool that they brought back from the original Modern Warfare 2 was the third person mode. It was kind of fun running around the map in third person. And then when you ADS, it goes into first person. It was just a different way to play Call of Duty. It's not going to be my main way I play it, but I thought it was kind of cool, so I figured I'd bring it up here. This video is sponsored by Bloodline, Heroes of Lithis, a hero collector fantasy RPG available on both Android and iOS. This game boasts 3D graphics where you collect champions, build kingdoms, and create legendary heirs. You can customize your champions by marrying different bloodlines that include Lycans, demons, dragonborn, and orcs. The higher your companion's intimacy is, the more powerful your offspring will be. This game is filled with awesome characters, some of which are free by using my links, such as Karg. He's a dragonborn that can transform into a dragon. And the hybrid heir, an extremely rare half dragonborn and half demigod. And both of them are free with my link. There are other possibilities, like Hannes, a Lycan, which is a werewolf clan of assassins with a sleek design, and Fulgur of the demigod. They've got the best AoE skills in the entire game. Create new legends and a crazy kingdom with Bloodline, Heroes of Lithis today. Click the link in the description to download the game for free, and you will also receive a free starter pack that's worth $20. You'll get 20 intimacy packs, 100,000 gold, and 100 diamonds. But hurry up, because it's only available for the next 30 days. All right, the next thing we have to talk about is this PS4 and PS5 hack because it's a big one. If you guys remember back a couple years ago, they released a new version of the Nintendo Switch that had the red box, and they didn't really announce it, but it was a pretty big hardware revision over the launch Nintendo Switch. It had a better processor that was more efficient, and because of that, it had a lot better battery life than that original Switch, and it cost the same amount of money. So people were wondering, why did Nintendo release a new hardware revision and not say anything about it? So the reason for that ended up being that someone was actually able to hack the Nintendo Switch, the launch unit, at the hardware level, so it was unpatchable by Nintendo. Anytime they patched it, it was easy to get around because the hack was at the hardware level. So something similar has just happened with the PlayStation 5 thanks to its PS2 emulator. So basically the way this hack works is that the emulator for the PS2 that converts PS2 games into PS4 games has special privileged access. So really any code you put through that emulator gets outputted as a PS4 game that the PS5 reads as A-OK. And the reason this is going to be very hard to patch is that the actual emulator itself isn't built into the console software, it's built into each individual game. So each individual PS2 game you're downloading on your PS5 has its own little emulator code built in that takes that PS2 game, filters it through, and outputs it as a PS4 game with special privileges is to take full advantage of the PlayStation 5. So the way you would do it is take advantage of this code that comes with every PS2 game. And if Sony wants to patch this, they'll have to re-upload every PS2 game onto the PlayStation Network, which I guess would be kind of complicated. But in the meantime, it's going to be really easy to get homebrewed content onto the console, and it's going to be hard for Sony to patch. There's obviously a lot of downsides to this, like if someone figured out how to make PS5 games piratable, Sony would lock down a lot of the stuff on the console like we saw with the PSP, the PS Vita, and the PS3. I hate stuff like that. It's like one person ruins it for everyone else, and that's probably a huge reason why we don't have a web browser on the PS5, because with the Vita and the PSP, a lot of the hacks you were able to do required the web browser, so Sony's just nipping that in the bud. So every time someone makes a hack like this, we get punished for it by having features we like removed from the console. But on the other hand, this is what keeps consoles alive a lot longer than these companies support them. Like being able to hack your Wii or your 3DS or even your PS Vita means that when Sony or Nintendo turn off the servers that keep these things active and alive, you'll be able to continue gaming on them. And there's no real difference like you would see with older consoles, where if you emulate a Super Nintendo game on your PC, you run into little issues that you don't have on the native device. Either way, we'll have to just wait and see how this shakes out. I'm really curious to see what Sony does to respond to this, because basically Sony put out a hardware bounty, like a hack a while ago, and this guy who figured out this hack presented it to them, but I guess they haven't heard back on if or when Sony's going to patch it, so they're putting it out into the wild now just to let people know they can do it, because if Sony doesn't care enough to patch it, then why not share it with other people, I guess is the logic there. All right, now it's time to get to the big guns though. We gotta talk about this brand new PS5 that's leaking out of Insider Gaming, which I guess is a new website. I looked at the Twitter, they have around 5,000 followers, but their pinned tweet has an image that basically says, yes, this site was created by a bunch of industry leakers who are sick of other leakers leaking rumors that never come true. Like one example I can think of off the top of my head is this Bloodborne rumor that comes up every few months where someone's like, yep, Sony's doing a new state of play or a new showcase, they're updating Bloodborne, it's gonna be 60 FPS, and we're also getting a full-on remake. I mean, how many times have we heard that leak from reputable sources? So I can kind of see why someone would want to get a website together of people who do their best to leak stuff that's true. And the big story they're launching their website with is a huge one that honestly seems very plausible. So if you guys have seen the videos where Austin Evans and I tear apart PS5s, basically what we've found is that Sony has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to internally update the PS5 and change the way parts are used in it, but they're not really changing anything on the outside of the device. Like they've gone as far as making the motherboard almost half the size of the one that you would have in your launch PS5, but the actual PS5 you get looks exactly the same despite being a little bit more bottom heavy. So right now your options for the PS5 are buying a disc edition, which is around $500, maybe a little bit more if you're outside the United States. Sorry guys. And you can also get a digital edition, which is $400 or maybe a little more outside the United States. And that one doesn't have a disc drive and it's cheaper. Obviously that cheaper edition is losing Sony money because they were already kind of breaking even on the $500 PS5, and including a disc drive does not cost $100. It costs like 25 cents at the maximum for Sony to do that. So by removing it and dropping the price $100, they are losing quite a bit of money on every digital edition. So the way Sony is trying to fix this is they are unifying the PS5 into one model that does not have a disc drive, but they're also making a detachable disc drive that when attached to the console, you will not be able to tell is actually an external disc drive. So it's also going to retain the same external look as the current PS5, but it's going to be a totally completely new model. So this thing is supposed to release around September of next year, and your options going forward from that point are you're going to be able to get a PS5 with a disc drive, but it's going to be removable. So what you would do is you would pop the side off of your PS5, you would detach the disc drive and unplug it from the new extra USB-C port they're adding to the back of the machine. And then you could pop on a side plate that's flat and doesn't have the slot for the disc drive. Or if you want to save some money, you could buy the digital edition of the PS5 that doesn't come with the disc drive, and you could use your PS Plus Extra games, your PS Plus Premium games, and then if you want to play your older PS4 games that are on a disc, or you want to buy a new PS5 game on a disc when you realize how much cheaper it actually is to buy games on a disc after a year, you could go to Target, Best Buy, or Amazon, buy a new disc drive for your PS5, and of course drop down 50 or 60 bucks on new side plates, because you don't want to have a PS5 without side plates with this disc drive hanging off the side of it. You could pop that bad boy on and then have a disc drive PS5. It reminds me honestly of the way the Xbox 360 launched, where if you got the Xbox, you could get the core edition, which came with a memory card instead of the hard drive, and you could store your Xbox Pro file and your saves on the memory card, and that was a lot cheaper. But if you really wanted to download games or store any big updates on the actual Xbox, you had to buy a hard drive. Or you could just buy the like Pro Edition, I think it was called, and that would come with the hard drive instead of the memory card. That seems to be what Sony is doing here. So what I'm assuming is by shrinking down the internals of the PS5, they've made it overall cheaper to make, and also by making it lighter, it's cheaper for them to ship it around the world. So if they're selling one for $400 without the disk drive attached, then they're saving money and potentially making a profit on that PS5. And then if you go buy the disk drive, they're selling that thing at a huge markup because, like I mentioned, including a disk drive is like $1/4 to $2.50. So if they're going to sell it to us for $100 or $140 or something like that, if it comes along with the side plate, they're going to be cleaning up with all of these disk drive attachments. The interesting thing about this though is it kind of seems like we are not going to get a physical revision with the PS5 Slim. Instead of that, they're unifying this thing into one look that has space for the disk drive to snap onto the side, and then you can use new side plates, and I'm assuming that they'll have to modify the side plates just a little bit to make it so that the USB cord that comes off of the disk drive can kind of reach around the back and get into that new port. So when we get this new version of the PS5, that's when we'll start seeing special editions, special edition plates, more special edition DualSenses, maybe even a PS5 Pro that has a fin in the middle like you've seen in so many of my thumbnails. And honestly, I wouldn't have believed this about a month ago, but after looking at the new PS5 and not only seeing how much they've shrunk down the internals of it, but also made it run more efficiently using 20 less watts of power, it really seems like they're trying to get to this perfect form of the PS5 that's not only just as powerful, using less power, but is also cheaper to manufacture, and that they can also just sell one version of and then pass off the cost to you to upgrade it to the disk drive model. And really, it seems like a cool option to me. And I think it's also cool because it doesn't piss off the people who have been buying PS5s for the first 2 years. Like I just mentioned in my last video that it's getting frustrating that we have all these PS4 and PS5 games and that the PS5 Pro is on the horizon. Well, if they're releasing this new revision of the PS5, like the PS5 Model D or whatever they're gonna call it, they have a couple more years to work on the PS5 Pro where the PS5 normal edition stays relevant. And that's kind of like the best of both worlds for PR and for us, the people who bought the PS5 at launch for $500. So this really could be the first generation where we don't have a slim model of the console, right? Like we technically do because the inside of it is the slim model. It's getting the upgrade there, but they're keeping the outside of it looking almost identical. And that's pretty cool, honestly. Like I like when consoles are redesigned. I usually want to go out and get one because as soon as I see the new model, even if it is uglier, like in my opinion, the jump from the launch PS4 to the PS4 Slim, I'm like, man, it's newer, it's better, I want it. And that's what happened with the Xbox One with me, where I didn't want it at launch, but when they launched the One S, I went out and bought one at Target because I was able to get a price error where if you bought it with Rock Band 4 at the time, you could return Rock Band 4 for full price. And honestly, if they're releasing this in September, next year is going to be stacked for Sony. Like we're all talking about this fall and how Microsoft is leaving it wide open for Sony, and Sony's definitely taking advantage of that with games like The Last of Us Part 1 and God of War Ragnarok. But man, if they're launching the PSVR 2 alongside a bunch of games, they're releasing a new version of the PS5 next year, potentially the DualSense Edge, they are just gonna like force Xbox into the corner and just dominate the news cycle with all this new hardware and all of the games we've had announced for 2023. Either way, I think 2023 is going to be a big year for gaming. I know I said that about 2022, then everything got delayed and this year ended up being pretty mid, but it seems like finally all these games that have been announced over the past few years are going to start trickling out in 2023, and it's going to be cool having new hardware to play it on.